If you look at the data and evidence on violence in childhood, recent reports by UNICEF and WHO do point out that the problem is quite extensive and persistent across all societies.
It would be sufficient to recall that 8% of global homicides affect children below the age of 15. It would be sufficient to recall that in many regions, victims of child trafficking are more than 60% of human trafficking victims.
When children experience violence, this indicates that they have had one of their most basic human rights violated. Young children, and in fact all children, expect us to protect them. It is up to adults to do that. And when we fail to do that, we have really not maintained our moral responsibility to children.
It's extremely difficult to measure violence. First of all, there are problems with its definitions. When it comes to children, children do not report instances of violence against them for fear. Parents do not report violence against children because of social stigma. And so, on the whole, there might be a general underreporting of violence if you look at the data.
Very young children are the ones that are most severely impacted by violence because this is where we have the greatest level of murders as a result of violence. Children in the preschool age group often get exposed to corporal punishment. They often see a lot of violence, and children who are of school age get exposed to corporal punishment both in the home and at school. They also get exposed to domestic violence within their home settings, and they also get exposed to community violence as they walk on the street. They see people fighting, hurting each other.
There are other forms of violence that differ between the sexes. So, for example, girls tend to be more vulnerable to child sexual abuse and things like sexual harassment and eve teasing than boys, even though boys also might be vulnerable to some forms of sexual abuse as well. What we see for boys is that they're more likely to experience violence linked to involvement in gangs or other street-based violence, and that's an important cause of illness and death amongst particularly adolescent boys in many regions of the world. I think it's important that we start to learn more about the connections between violence against women and violence against children. So what we know from current evidence, for example, is that children in households where there is domestic violence are also at high risk of experiencing violence. And what we see is also that those children are more likely to grow up and either perpetrate violence or experience violence in their adult lives. So there's this intergenerational connection.
People ill-treat children very often because of the situation they're in, the poverty they're in, the fact they don't have choices, the fact that they have not been given any other way of bringing up children.
We have also learned that the countries where violence has not been considered are the ones who are lagging behind. These are the countries where we have higher levels of under-5 mortality, where we have more children out of school, where we have poor rule of law and law enforcement, and where people trust less the institutions that can protect them from any form of violence.
I myself am a member of Parliament, the UK Parliament, and I know that politicians all over the world could do much more to prevent violence in childhood.
But we have seen that when political will is strong, there is a change in society, in attitudes, in behavior, and in protection mechanisms to prevent and address violence against children. Past years, the international community has committed to protecting all children from violence. This is part of their commitment to the realization of the rights of the child. We see more and more states adopting national agendas to prevent and eliminate violence during childhood. More than 80 countries have such an agenda.
Nations are spending a very small amount of money on prevention of violence, and that the strategies that exist are such that even a small amount of investment can yield substantial economic, financial, and human benefits to society.
If we move forward the commitments that governments have made, if governments invest in prevention initiatives, for instance, supporting parents to be the best possible parents, investing in support to early childhood initiatives, investing in creating inclusive environments within the school system, and creating societies that care for their children as an investment for social progress for all, then the world will be different.
The No Violence in Childhood Global Learning Initiative rests on the firm belief that violence must end and that prevention of violence in childhood is possible and it is affordable.
By convening an eminent network of global experts and thinkers and practitioners, we hope to contribute very significantly to the global conversation about how violence can be prevented in childhood. And we will do this through leveraging both the best evidence there is, but also communicating it in a way that different governments can understand what it means for them and what it means for their actions in ensuring that strategies for prevention are put in place irrespective of their resource context. So our job is really to look at the lessons emerging from around the world and presenting them in a way that becomes comprehensible to governments and helps them very practically define their own global violence prevention strategies in line with the post-2015 commitments that we hope will be secured for children next September.
Prescriptions that we find in many of the global reports and the strategies recommended are extremely useful, but they are too generic. So, for example, if one were to say that changing social norms and behavior is essential if we want to address the issue of violence in childhood, nobody will dispute this strategy, but countries and regions of the world are asking, how do we really do it? That is, from why and what, the real game changer in the case of prevention of violence has to be the how of it.
We might say we're drowning in data, starving for knowledge, and one of the reasons we call this no violence is because we really want to synthesize the knowledge and provide direction for effective programs and policies. And unfortunately, although there is a large database on risk factors and prevention programs, the majority of studies have been conducted in a minority of countries. So we know a lot more about high-income countries than we know about lower and middle-income countries. We know a lot more about countries where children don't grow up under conditions of extreme and toxic stress. And one of the things that we want to do is look at what is it about core elements of effective programs that can be adapted and applied in different settings, and particularly for children growing up under these truly adverse conditions.
You will find much talk about criminalizing, making more laws, punishing more people. There have to be laws and there has to be punishment, but that will not be our priority. Our priority will be looking at how people can live in a way where they have the time and the confidence and the knowledge to bring up their children without violence.
With the shaping of the post-2015 Global Development Agenda, we can ensure that violence against children is a priority for all countries in the world. We can ensure that violence against children is perceived as a cross-cutting concern, promoting progress in education, in health, in safe spaces, in gender equality and empowerment. We know enough to act. We have the resources to do it, and no doubt we can make a difference for all children.